Hello and welcome to our morning edition of Arirang News. We begin with these stories making the headlines at this hour. North Korea fired a ballistic missile off its east coast this morning, its second launch in less than a week. This comes as South Korea and the United States prepare to begin their annual joint military drills next Monday. South Korea's job market grew in July, with 108,000 jobs added from a year earlier. But youth employment remained weak, with the unemployment rate among people aged 15 to 29 seeing its biggest increase in 5.5 years. Rescue workers in Colombia are working against the clock to find survivors trapped under rubble after a 7.4 magnitude earthquake struck the western part of the country on Monday. More than 250 people are estimated to have been killed, according to local authorities, and the death toll is expected to rise. We begin today with North Korea, which launched a ballistic missile toward the East Sea this morning, making its second launch in less than a week. This comes just days before the start of joint military exercises between South Korea and the United States. Our Park Jun-an starts us off.
Just 6 days after North Korea fired a ballistic missile toward the East Sea, South Korea's Joint Chiefs of Staff announced on Wednesday that it detected another launch at around 6 a.m. from the same coastal region of Wonsan. The Joint Chiefs of Staff announced that the missile flew over 700 kilometers. South Korean and U.S. intelligence officials are currently conducting a precise analysis to determine the projectile's exact specifications. The JCS also stated that South Korea, the United States, and Japan are closely sharing real-time information on the launch. The military immediately heightened its surveillance and preparedness for potential additional launches while maintaining a firm combined defense posture. This latest test was North Korea's 11th ballistic missile launch this year, with the timing of the launch seen as a key factor. It comes just ahead of the annual South Korea-US Ulchi Freedom Shield exercise, set to run from August 17th through 27th. The drill is intended to counter North Korea's evolving nuclear and weapons capabilities. Pyongyang has routinely denounced the joint defense drills as a rehearsal for invasion, using missile launches around the exercise as a show of force and expression of protest. Following the launch, South Korea's Office of National Security convened an emergency security meeting with relevant agencies, including the Defense Ministry and the Joint Chiefs of Staff. The office said it reviewed the response and strongly condemned the consecutive launches as a clear violation of UN Security Council resolutions and urged North Korea to immediately halt its provocations. Park Jun-an, Arirang News.
Over in Colombia, a massive earthquake has left more than 250 people dead, with the death toll expected to rise as rescue operations continue. Crews are digging through collapsed buildings and twisted debris, racing to find survivors in some of the country's hardest-hit communities. Our Lee Seung-jae has more.
Rescue crew in western Colombia are racing to find survivors after a powerful earthquake killed more than 250 people, according to estimates from local authorities. The 7.4 magnitude quake struck early Monday and was the strongest to hit the South American country in decades. It caused widespread destruction across Colombia's coffee-growing region, damaging or flattening apartment buildings, homes, schools, and health centers. In the hardest-hit cities, volunteers and rescue teams worked through the night using cranes, excavators, and even their bare hands to search through piles of concrete and twisted steel.
What we're doing right now is removing debris so we can bring in the dog to search for any survivors. We're waiting for them to bring in the dog and for people to help us.
Families gathered near collapsed buildings waiting for any sign that missing relatives might still be alive. The United Nations Humanitarian Office says 126 deaths had been officially confirmed as of Monday night, with nearly 1,500 people injured. But local authorities on Tuesday estimated the death toll had risen to around 254 as rescue teams reached more damaged communities and communications were gradually restored. Nearly 5,000 homes have been damaged, while dozens of buildings have collapsed and hundreds of residences have been completely destroyed. Power, Water and phone services remain disrupted in several areas, while damage to healthcare facilities is further complicating rescue efforts and aid deliveries, particularly in areas near the epicenter. 이승재, Arirang News.
Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy warned of the threat of additional North Korean troops being deployed to support Russia for a second straight day. In a national address on Tuesday, Zelenskyy said Russian President Vladimir Putin believes he can prolong the war by mobilizing more Russian troops and bringing in additional forces from North Korea. Zelenskyy also accused Russia of using North Korean-made missiles in overnight attacks on Ukraine. Ukrainian authorities say 6 civilians were killed in the Zaporizhzhia region in strikes involving North Korean missiles. On Monday, Zelenskyy said Russia had received additional North Korean ballistic missiles and was increasing the deployment of North Korean troops, warning the developments could also pose a security risk to South Korea. South Korea's small-cap stocks are regaining investor interest as restrictions on leveraged ETFs tracking heavyweight chip makers shift money toward KOSDAQ names. For more on the domestic economy, we're joined today by Professor Shin Myung-gyu, Associate Professor of Economics at Yonsei University. Professor Shin, thanks for coming on today.
Thank you for having me.
So the country's tech-heavy KOSDAQ share index has risen more than 30% from its low now. What should investors be watching out for?
I think investors should be careful not to confuse a change in money flows with a change in fundamentals. The recent restrictions on leveraged ETFs linked to Samsung Electronics and SK Hynix have reduced one of the most speculative channels into Korea's largest chip makers. Some of the short-term investment now seems to be moving toward KOSDAQ and small-cap stocks. That can certainly support prices in the short run, but it does not automatically imply that the earnings outlook for those companies has improved. The first thing investors should watch is liquidity. Smaller firms usually have lower trading volumes, so prices can move much more sharply when money enters or leaves the market. Second, they should look carefully at fundamentals such as earnings, cash flow, and debt. Small cap rallies can easily become momentum driven, especially when investors are searching for alternatives after a major market correction. And finally, diversification matters. One positive effect of this shift could be that Korea's market becomes less concentrated in just Samsung Electronics and SK Hynix. But if investors simply move speculative leverage from large cap stocks into smaller firms, the underlying risk has not really disappeared.
Right, and tighter regulations on these single stock leveraged ETFs have coincided with the recent downturn in Korean stocks. So are we now seeing investors shift their focus toward overseas assets?
Yes, we are seeing a noticeable shift back toward overseas assets, particularly the U.S. equities. But I would not attribute that entirely to the new ETF regulations. In July, Korean retail investors bought about $4.6 billion in the U.S. stocks on a net basis, a sharp increase from the previous month. At the same time, we are now beginning to see money flow out of domestic equity ETFs. There are possibly two forces behind this. First, confidence in the Korean market has weakened after the recent sharp correction, particularly in Samsung Electronics and SK Hynix. Second, U.S. markets have remained relatively resilient, especially in technology and AI-related stocks, so investors naturally see them as an alternative. The new restrictions may accelerate this trend. Some investors who still want high risk, high return exposure can simply move into US-listed leveraged ETF, including products offering 3 times leverage. So regulation may reduce leverage in the Korean market without necessarily reducing investors' overall appetite for leverage. And I think that is the kind of the important point. If investors are moving overseas, for diversification, that can actually be healthy. But if they are simply replacing Korean leveraged products with even more leveraged US products, then the risk is just being relocated rather than reduced.
I see. And gold prices have been relatively low for months, but they've now hit a 2-month high as markets await U.S. inflation data this week. What's driving this, and where do you see gold prices heading from here?
I think there are two major forces driving gold prices right now. The first is safe haven demand. Geographical uncertainty remains very high, particularly because of the renewed tensions between the US and Iran and uncertainty surrounding the Strait of Hormuz. When investors become nervous about geographical or financial risk, gold naturally becomes more attractive as a safe asset. The second factor is US monetary policy. Gold does not pay interest, so when interest rate rises, holding gold becomes relatively less attractive. That is why this week's US inflation data will be so important. If inflation comes in stronger than expected, markets may expect the Federal Reserve to raise the rates again, which can possibly put downward pressure on gold. But softer inflation than expected will reduce that pressure and could support another move higher. So looking further ahead, I think long-term environment remains relatively supportive for gold. Geographic uncertainty is unlikely to disappear very quickly, and demand for gold as a portfolio hedge remains strong.
All right, and more broadly, the United States has stepped in to buy Japanese yen for the first time in more than a decade. This is a rare bilateral intervention in Japan's currency market. What's behind this, and what impact could this have on South Korea's currency and the global currency market?
There seem to be two important reasons behind this unusual intervention, as you just mentioned. First, the yen had weakened to an extreme level, creating concerns not only for Japan, but also for broader financial markets. A very weak yen increases import prices and inflation in Japan, while also encouraging large speculative positions based on the assumption that Japanese interest rate will remain low. Second, U.S. participation sends a much stronger signal than intervention by Japan alone. It tells markets that both governments are uncomfortable with excessive currency movements and are willing to act together. But intervention alone probably cannot permanently strengthen the yen. The fundamental issue is that the US-Japan interest rate gap still remains very high at 2.5 percentage points. As long as that gap remains large, there will continue to be underlying pressure on the yen. And for South Korea, I think stronger yen could actually provide some support for Korean won. The yen and the won often respond to similar regional and global forces, and an extremely weak yen can put competitive pressure on Korean exporters and also weigh on another Asian currencies. So if the intervention succeeds in stabilizing the yen, and especially if the Bank of Japan follows with a rate hike, it could reduce some of the depreciation pressure on the Korean won as well. But eventually, the won will still depend much more on Korea's own fundamentals, U.S. interest rate, and global investor sentiment.
I see. All right, Professor Shim, thank you so much for your time and insight today. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
South Korea recorded its biggest job gain in 4 months, adding more than 100,000 jobs in July. The Ministry of Data and Statistics said this morning that the number of employed people reached 29.13 million, up 108,000 from a year earlier. This marked a second straight month of job gains after a downturn in May. However, the employment rate declined for a fourth consecutive month. Among those aged 15 to 29, the rate saw an on-year fall for the 27th straight month. The youth unemployment rate rose 1.3 percentage points to 6.8%, marking the sharpest increase in more than 5 years. And record-breaking heat this summer has hit our dinner table, disrupting agricultural and seafood supplies. In response, the government has launched emergency measures to mitigate further damage. Our Lee Ji-yeon reports.
Unprecedented temperatures over the past few weeks have significantly increased grocery prices. This has raised alarms over heatflation, which combines the words heat and inflation to signal the impact of severe weather on food costs. Extreme heat waves are warming ocean waters and driving up the cost of seafood. According to the weekly seafood market trends for the fifth week of July, the price of wild flatfish rose about 11% compared to this time last year, while cutlass fish surged roughly 42%. Mackerel saw a staggering 47% increase. To stabilize seafood prices, the government is stepping up its response. The Ministry of Oceans and Fisheries will host a special promotion offering up to 50% discounts on domestic seafood products across major supermarket chains nationwide in August.
By providing about $7 discount per person, we hope to give consumers greater savings during this period.
Beyond seafood, the extreme heat has also caused a sharp increase in price for vegetables. According to retail price data from the Korea Agro Fisheries and Food Trade Corporation, young radish climbed about 86%, while young Napa cabbage surged nearly 87% compared to the previous month. Spinach saw more than a 108% increase. Local merchants selling agricultural products on the ground say they are feeling the impact.
Vegetable prices usually rise in the summer, but when it gets too hot, leafy greens basically just melt away.
Driven by rising agricultural prices, some consumers have turned toward traditional markets, which can be a more affordable options for shoppers. At traditional markets, consumers can save about 40% compared to average retail prices.
Traditional markets are very cheap. Also, they give you generous portions and even throw in some extra produce for free.
Although the extreme heat has settled down since the beginning of this week, summer typhoons remain a concern and climate anxiety persists among the public. To address potential supply disruptions and price volatility, the government plans to closely monitor supply and demand trends for items highly sensitive to extreme heat and heavy rain. While inflation dropped into the 2% range last month, there is still a risk that extreme weather could push up food costs even further. The government pledged to focus all efforts on stabilizing the prices of everyday products. Lee Ji-yeon, Arirang News.
K-pop powerhouse BTS is back on the road in North America, and host cities are busy rolling out red carpets to welcome the beloved artists. From ceremonial street renamings to shoutouts from governors, local enthusiasm is reaching a fever pitch. Our Lee Si-woo reports.
After BTS kicked off the North American stretch of its tour in New York this month, cities across the region are busy rolling out red carpets to celebrate the K-pop sensation's arrival. In Canada, the Toronto City Council officially passed a motion to temporarily rename a section of a key city street, BTS Boulevard. The ceremonial name change will run from the 21st of this month through late next month, giving fans a new destination while the group is in town. And ahead of the group's stop in the U.S. state of Maryland, its governor, Wes Moore, posted a video message online on Sunday, personally calling out the names of all 7 members to welcome them to the state. Moore also encouraged BTS fans, the ARMY, to scream and engage. BTS is in the midst of a massive world tour, Arirang, named after the recent studio album, running from April 2026 through March 2027 across 34 cities. The North America tour runs through September. Lee Si-woo, Arirang News.
Good morning, I'm Chu Ji-hyun, and this is The World Now. In the Democratic Republic of Congo, more than 2,000 people have now died of Ebola. Officials said it is the fastest spreading outbreak ever recorded. The country's Public Health Institute reported on Tuesday that the death toll had reached 2,011. It has doubled from 1,000 deaths in less than a month. An outbreak in 2018 took more than a year to reach the same number of deaths. This strain, called Bundibugyo, has no approved vaccine and no approved treatment. Late detection, conflict, and overstretched hospitals have helped it spread. The World Health Organization calls it a global health emergency. In the United States, the Washington Post reported on Monday that President Donald Trump was moved off Air Force One in a catering truck last month and switched to a different plane over an Iranian threat to kill him. Trump boarded Air Force One in front of cameras in Ankara after the NATO summit, but moments later he left it by catering truck and got on a smaller Air Force jet. Reporters and some White House staff still thought he was on board and were told to keep the window shades down. When later asked why, Trump said they were probably on a dangerous flight. Both planes landed in Britain minutes apart. The White House would not confirm the switch, saying only that many enemies have their sights on the president. In Russia, a former U.S. Marine has been released after more than 4 years in prison. President Trump said on Tuesday that Moscow had freed 32-year-old Robert Gilman for humanitarian reasons after talks with President Vladimir Putin. Gilman had been in prison since 2022. Trump said, quote, Russia asked for nobody in return and that no exchange took place. In Portugal, Cristiano Ronaldo has married his longtime partner, Georgina Rodríguez. The couple posted a photo of their rings on social media. They wed at a civil ceremony in a coastal town in western Portugal near the capital, Lisbon. The couple has been in a relationship since 2016, having met in Madrid, where Ronaldo was a player. The 41-year-old has scored nearly 1,000 goals in his career and recently played in his 6th World Cup.
The nights are finally cooling down and we can feel the change in the morning air. And along with much improved temperatures, people seem to be in better moods compared to the last couple of weeks. And since the humidity has settled down, the feels-like temperatures are pretty much similar to what the readings indicate as well. It is actually abnormal to have these pleasant conditions even before Liberation Day, but summer is not over just yet. Meanwhile, Typhoon Chanhom is moving toward the East Sea, sending strong easterly winds and moisture toward Korea. Much of the East Coast will see rain through Friday along with strong winds, so those having a summer vacation near the water need to stay alert. And this afternoon, Seoul and Gwangju will be getting up to 32 degrees Celsius. Daejeon, Daegu, Busan will be topping out at 31 degrees under sunny skies this afternoon. Inland regions will have passing showers at the end of the week, while the afternoon heat stays with us.
Now that's all we have for this morning. Arirang News will be back at noon Korea time. Thanks for watching.